Streaming now on CBS News Los Angeles, this is Primary Countdown. This week, the race for LA mayor, veteran state and local leaders competing with the billionaire real estate developer. Will anyone emerge to challenge frontrunners Rick Caruso and Karen Bass?
My body, my choice.
And will the battle over abortion help or hurt Republicans as they attempt to take control of Congress? Analysis on the impact here in California and nationwide. Ballots sent out in the mail statewide from Congress to California local races and more. Everything you need to know before casting your votes. Good evening, everybody. I'm Tom Waite. Thank you for joining me. This is Primary Countdown. For the next 4 weeks, we will get you ready for the June 7th primary, covering the candidates and the issues with insight and analysis from our panel of political experts. And to this point of the campaign season, no race in our area is getting more attention than, of course, the LA mayoral race. Two of the candidates are polling well ahead of the rest, but all are still confident they can win one of the two top spots and make it to the election in November.
Think nobody can clean up LA?
You can't escape his ads. LA billionaire developer Rick Caruso is spending millions of his personal fortune and is shooting up in the polls in the race to become LA's next mayor.
The city we all love is in a state of crisis.
Caruso's well-known upscale properties include the Grove and Palisades Village. He says his experience as a developer makes him uniquely qualified to handle the homeless crisis. He says if he wins, he'll sideline city council to deal with the crisis.
I've called for a state of emergency, take the authority to solve the homeless problem in the mayor's office. As a builder, as an executive, I know how to fix that problem.
Congresswoman Karen Bass has one of the longest political resumes of anyone on the ballot.
I have enjoyed my time in Congress, and I am not leaving because I am tired of Congress, but I'm leaving. I am compelled to come back to Los Angeles because of the crisis that we're experiencing in our city.
To become the next mayor of the great city of Los Angeles.
Another mayoral candidate with a long political resume is LA City Councilman Kevin De Leon.
I've always wanted to be in the position of leadership during moments of great crisis, and that moment is now.
Before winning his seat on city council in 2020, De Leon served as state senate president until term limits kicked in. If he's elected mayor, De Leon says he'll create a city health department from the ground up, paid for by state and federal dollars.
So we can move even quicker when it comes to deploying an army of mental health specialists dealing with the crises that are on our streets today.
Underdog. I'm Mike Feuer.
LA City Attorney Mike Feuer just launched this new ad as part of his campaign to win, dubbing himself an underdog, but also as a leader with pragmatic solutions without divisive rhetoric, who knows how to handle a city in crisis.
All these crises converging at once. And I was always taught growing up that that's how we define ourselves, is when times are the toughest, not when they're easy.
Why Gina Viola for mayor?
I'm different from what's out there.
And also polling in the top 5, Gina Viola, who comes into the race without the same name recognition as the other top candidates who hold elected offices. Viola is a community activist, mother, and business owner. Among Viola's top priorities, making Los Angeles more equitable.
All you have to do is drive across Los Angeles, and you can see and feel the inequities in how the budget dollars are distributed amongst our city. The parks in Watts don't look like the parks on the west side.
All right, a lot to get to there. Joining me now to break it all down are some of the best political minds in all of Southern California. Let's get to them right now. All right, tonight I am joined by the great Jessica Levinson, professor of law at Loyola Law School, also the host of the podcast Passing Judgment. We also have Zev Yaroslavsky, former LA County supervisor and now of UCLA's Luskin School of Public Affairs, and Dr. Jennifer Cryer, assistant professor of political science and international relations at USC. Thank you all for being with me. I know we always speak about different issues at different times, but let's get right to the race here for mayor. So the polls are showing that the race right now with Karen Bass and Rick Caruso kind of in the top 2 spots, but it's also showing about 40% of voters undecided. So let's go to you first, Jessica. Talk to us about what do you see in terms of how someone can break through to that top 2 spot right now, those 2 spots?
Well, I mean, cue the tape from when I was desperately wrong on CBS in 2016, and I said this will be a short night for Hillary Clinton. But I think the answer is it's going to be very difficult to break through, and increasingly so because there are really only two candidates who can dominate the airwaves. We have our ballots. I have my ballot right next to me. People are finally starting to tune into these races. They're listening, they're watching, they're talking to their friends. And the buzz, as you introduce this segment, is really all about those two people. We know that money means you can reach people. It gives you a megaphone. These are the top two fundraisers. These are the top two candidates. I don't see a lot of movement here.
And Zev, when you look at the top two, we saw Kevin De Leon, city councilman. He probably, before this race kind of settled down a little bit, thought he might have a shot at that top two. Do you think Caruso being in the race has really changed that for him?
I think it's changed it for him, and I think it's changed it for everyone. First of all, he's had the field to himself for the last 2 months. He's spent $28 million on television ads and mail before anybody else has even started to spend money. The only other person who's been on television ads has been Mike Fuhr, who I think is trying to break out of the lower tier and get some attention so he can position himself maybe to break through the top two. But it's at the moment it's a two-person race, and I'm not sure it's tied right now. We haven't seen any polls in the last month or so since the Times poll, but Caruso has been ubiquitous on television and in the mailbox. I must have had a half a dozen pieces of mail from him personally, and when the first month he was on TV, he catapulted into a tie. He was way behind, and then he catapulted into a tie. I see no evidence that he has plateaued at this point.
And Dr. Cryer, what do you think in terms of the perception that Caruso, maybe because he has so much money and he's spending so much of it in the race, will there be a perception that he's buying this election, and will that hurt him? And also the sort of brand of him being a developer. We obviously know how unpopular a certain developer was here in Los Angeles for the presidential race. What do you think that will have in terms of an impact on the race?
Yeah, well, scholarship shows that name recognition and resources can really make your campaign. And regardless of perceptions, the ability to leverage financial resources to get your platform out there is advantageous. And so even if there is a contingent of voters that feel like this is perhaps being put on unequal footing, at the end of the day, again, the most recent poll shows a 24-23 statistically insignificant difference, really putting him at the forefront.
And Jessica, I'm curious what you think about, so we kind of touched on the Kevin De Leon, also Fuhr, but we have Gina Viola, who also pulled in the top 5. She's a community activist. I mean, it's pretty impressive that someone with no, high-profile office experience registered in a poll and pretty decently, even if it's just 2%, when you have 40% of the people undecided. Could a Gina Viola, with ballots going out, with that grassroots support, someone like her, if she really hits the ground and gets out there, does someone like Gina Viola have a chance, or even Mike Fuhr, city attorney?
So we certainly have seen upsets, and we certainly have seen grassroots candidates fairly recently on the LA City Council win in places where you didn't think they were going to, in places where it really upset the establishment. Having said that, running for office, and I feel silly saying this with Zev Yaroslavsky right next to me, but running for office in LA City on a citywide level, it's really expensive, and it's like running in a lot of other states. And so that kind of grassroots upset that maybe you would see in a council district, it's really hard to pull off. And the other thing is, we know when it comes to local races, even though I just said it's kind of like running in a state, in California, local races also, I think, are comparatively low information. Where do we get our information when we're not in a culture where we talk about it a lot, where it's constantly in our conversation? We get it from paid media. And so I think it's going to be really hard for somebody to break through.
And then we have the Garcetti factor, or not factor. Yesterday, or this week, I should say, Mayor Garcetti learned the results of a Republican investigation in the Senate about accusations that he ignored his former top advisor's accusations of sexual harassment against that particular person. do the candidates want his endorsement, Zev? Do they want to hear from Garcetti, or do they want him just to stay back?
Well, I don't know that they want his endorsement. They don't want him to endorse against them either. His popularity has dropped considerably over the last 2 years. We've polled him now for 3 years in the Luskin poll that I oversee at UCLA. It's a countywide survey, but he's gone from where he was viewed favorably by over 60% of the voters of the people, not just voters, to where he's now in the mid to high 40s. People are angry about the city. They're scared about inflation. They're concerned about crime. They're disgusted by the condition of our streets with homelessness and the like. So anyone who's associated with City Hall right now, I think, is behind the 8 ball a bit, which is why I think it's that Rick Caruso and Karen Bass. Rick Caruso is not affiliated with City Hall directly, although he's been a commissioner in the past, and Karen Bass, who's been in Congress and a very respected congresswoman at that. So these are two people who aren't tarnished by what's going on at City Hall, the corruption, the seeming lack of ability to deal with the problems that are concerning people. So I'm not sure that Garcetti is a factor in an endorsement sense. If I were running, I wouldn't want him endorsing against me, but I don't think it would necessarily do a whole lot for me.
Same question to you, Professor Cryer. What's your take on that?
I think Jessica and Zev have perfectly articulated each point. One, the endorsement's worth is really contingent on the value of the endorser. And again, right now, given the contentious nature of this politics and the controversy surrounding local government, it doesn't seem like it's to their advantage to have that nod of support. Silence might be the best option here for both. But in addition, I think the endorsement doesn't lend itself to their two top issues. Caruso has been campaigning on public safety. Bass has been campaigning on housing. Their 23 and 24 tie is premised upon having favorability among voters who care about those two issues, respectively. And so again, and if the endorsement lends itself to that issue position, perhaps they would have something to gain, but I don't see that here.
And Jessica, do you think at this point, if we do see some surprises, will it come from, some sort of scandal, or do you think it's going to be because somebody gets a good media buy? I mean, just to break the mold that we're in, I'm just curious how you think that we could see a seismic change in this race. It seems kind of locked in that the two top challengers, Bass and Caruso.
It does, which is, again, strange to say because we have so mmany people who are undecided. I actually think that we had the first moment last Monday where Rick Caruso's momentum really was halted a little bit. As Zev pointed out, he entered the race. He was absolutely a game changer in terms of entering. He really was able to exponentially grow his support. Then he was able to dominate the media airwaves. But what changed? There was the leak of that decision that would overturn Roe v. Wade. And of course, while the mayor in Los Angeles does not have anything close to direct control over whether or not Roe v. Wade will be the law of the land, you immediately saw that there was press about, well, Rick Caruso has supported Republicans and Republican causes that were pro-life. And I do think because it is such an important issue at this time, not just to female voters, but a lot of voters in Los Angeles who are left of center and or moderate, that it will, again, even though the mayor doesn't have direct control over this, it will give people a moment of pause. It was the first time I saw that he was kind of pulled back from that really endless train of momentum.
Thank you all so much for being here and joining us. And I'm sure we're going to hear a lot more. I know I will be bothering all of you a lot more leading up to the June 7th primary for your insights. But for now, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Right. From Roe versus Wade to redistricting to the influence of former President Trump, the issues and the implications in key races for the House and Senate when primary countdown continues.
It's only on 2. It is getting progressively worse.
Do you have a quick second to speak with us?
We're grateful for the coverage, for shedding some light.
Only on CBS 2, an illegal grow operation.
4,700 marijuana plants.
Original reporting with real results.
You guys made that story, they started to react.
I thought he was going to take my girls.
I think we have the red Camaro stopped.
Yes, sir. We take this stuff very serious.
For the news you won't see anywhere else, look for only on CBS 2 News. Got your phone handy? Of course you do. Scan this right here. Download the CBS LA app. And just like that, you're connected to all the best local news and videos. Now, if only everything were this easy.
Welcome back, everybody. This is Primary Countdown. I'm Tom Waite. We've got all of your local races covered, but we've also got all of the national races as well. A check on the U.S. House, who's going to control it after the election this November, and who's going to control the Senate. We're going to try to answer some of those questions here with one of our most prolific CBS News national correspondents. Political reporter Robert Costa is with us. Thank you so much for joining us, Robert. Let's start with where we stand in terms of the U.S. House and Senate. What do you forecast right now in terms of control and margin of victory?
That's the big question. And when you look at the polling data right now in May of 2022, and you talk to top strategists in both of the major parties, what's evident is that both sides believe that there probably will be Republican gains in the House and Senate this November. That being said, both parties acknowledge publicly and even more frankly privately that a lot can change between now and then. You have variables across the political landscape, from how voters feel about inflation and the economy and kitchen table issues to cultural issues that are suddenly moving toward the forefront, like abortion rights.
Right, and that was actually going to be my next question, because that's obviously a huge issue right now with that leaked draft opinion. Will that shift things? Do you think that will move the needle? Will that drive voters out on one side or the other?
Keep a close eye on turnout on the Democratic side in upcoming primary elections. Is there energy among core Democratic voters to make sure that their candidates, whether it's for federal office or even in state office, are defending abortion rights? That is a key issue for so many Democratic voters across the country. And with the looming threat of a possible overturning of Roe v. Wade, will that bring Democratic voters back with new energy to the polls? Because so far this year, Democratic voters like President Biden, but there's not a ton of energy behind him. There's a recognition that he has passed an infrastructure bill. He passed a rescue plan, trillions of dollars, back in early 2021. But his approval rating has sunk in recent months from where it was when he began his presidency. So Democrats believe also that Republicans could overstep their political positioning. You look at President Biden's recent comments. He's referring to his Republican opponents not so much as Republicans anymore, but he calls them the MAGA crowd, the Make America Great Again crowd, a reference to the Trump coalition. And you see Biden and other Democrats running against the Republican Party in their view as an extremist party. And they also believe that the upcoming January 6th investigation and the hearings in the House of Representatives and ultimately a final report from that committee could also be another variable. But Republicans feel confident that the economy, if it remains as is, will lift their tide this fall.
And redistricting, we've seen that play out across the country in blue and red states. Who do you think that's going to benefit the most right now? Do you think that that will help Republicans gain more seats? I mean, that's kind of what I'm seeing in terms of the numbers and the districts that we've seen redrawn.
It's Right now, something that's under active litigation in so many states and battles within state legislatures battling governors, it's hard at this point as a political reporter and analyst to have some kind of wholesale conclusion on where redistricting goes at this point. It's so active in different areas. Sometimes it favors the Democrats. Democrats sometimes are fighting back against Republican lines and vice versa. But it's an important issue because after the 2020 election and so much contention about that election, and Republicans in some corners calling it a fraudulent election, falsely claiming it was rigged against President Trump, you now see that redistricting has become the next battleground when it comes to election integrity, and everybody is paying attention.
Right, and speaking of that, we have a couple of swing districts here in Southern California, Congresswoman Michelle Steele and also Congresswoman Young Kim. How do you see those districts playing out at this point going into November?
You are all lucky in California in the sense that if you're a political junkie, California is the place to pay attention to. It's so rare to have the congressional leaders in both sides of the House of Representatives. Leader McCarthy on the Republican side, the minority leader, Speaker Pelosi from the other side, one from Bakersfield, the Fresno area, Central Valley, the other from San Francisco, in that area of Northern California. Both of these Californians have enormous influence over their parties and their strategy when it comes to House races. So you can be sure when I'm talking to members up at the Capitol here in Washington, they're saying McCarthy, Pelosi paying close attention to those races, and they believe that just like the Central Valley in 2018 and 2020, Southern California now really matters because sometimes Latino voters in that area may be a little bit more culturally conservative. Maybe they can move like we've seen in Arizona and Florida to the Republican side, but we also see a lot of energy on the Democratic side when it comes to younger voters and people who are moving into California. And so those are toss-up districts in some respects at this point, and they're important ones because the Democrats right now have a very narrow House majority.
And you touched on this a little bit, the Trump factor, the former president. Is he still a kingmaker? Will he still have a lot of influence on this election, either helping or hurting candidates?
He is someone who Democrats believe is a good foil for them, but not always the perfect foil. Governor Gavin Newsom has been a staunch critic of President Trump, repeatedly assailing the Republicans for being too closely aligned with him. But you see from other Democrats a focus on different issues, not always focusing on Trump. In the Virginia gubernatorial election last year, Governor Terry McAuliffe really talked about Trump all the time. He lost to the Republican businessman Glenn Youngkin. Democrats have paid attention to that race as something that maybe they could learn a lesson or two from, to not talk about Trump incessantly. At the same time, you look at the Republican side, they all want the Trump endorsement. They wanted it in recent days in Ohio. Conservative J.D. Vance, the writer, he won the Trump endorsement. He won the Republican Senate primary in Ohio. In Nebraska on Tuesday, a bigger crowd of Republicans in that gubernatorial primary in that state clamoring to be seen as the Trump favorite. State after state, Trump still has political capital, and you see it through people's actions in Republican primaries.
Yeah, it's interesting. All those states playing out the way you described it, but then in Georgia, he's backing, obviously, the former Senator Perdue there. It doesn't seem to be going quite as well, but you're right. A lot of other places and politicians, they are clamoring for that endorsement. Thank you so much, Robert Costa, coming to us from Washington, D.C. Thank you, sir. We really appreciate your time.
It's only on 2.
It is getting progressively worse.
Do you have a quick second to speak with us?
We're grateful for the coverage, for shedding some light.
Only on CBS 2, an illegal grow operation.
4,700 marijuana plants.
Original reporting with real results.
You guys made that story, they started to react.
I thought he was going to take my girls.
I think we have the red Camaro stopped.
Yes, sir. We take this stuff very serious.
For the news you won't see anywhere else, look for only on CBS 2 News. Got your phone handy? Of course you do. Scan this right here. Download the CBS LA app. And just like that, you're connected to all the best local news and videos. Now, if only everything were this easy.
All registered voters in California should receive their primary ballots in the mail, one of these. And it should happen this week, and they have until June 7th to return this. KCAL 9's Rick Montanez has everything you need to know before casting your ballot.
Making sure your vote counts. It starts with everyone across California receiving a vote-by-mail ballot. Inside, you'll find your ballot with state and local contests, a list of places to vote in person, and an envelope for your first voting option to send your ballot back by mail.
There's a postage paid return envelope, so no stamp necessary. They can put it back in the mail to us. Again, as long as it's postmarked by Election Day, that ballot's going to be counted.
Dean Logan is LA County's registrar. He says the packet will vary in size from about 3 to 7 pages, depending on your local races. Second option, fill it out and drop it off at a secure drop box. The registrar's office sends staff out daily to collect the ballots and inspect the 400 drop boxes around the county. A COVID practice that is here to stay because people seem to like it.
It's a proven system. We had close to 74% at the November presidential election 2020 who cast their ballot by mail. In the gubernatorial recall last fall, 86% of the ballots cast were cast by mail.
Third, you can also fill out the packet and drop it off in person to any vote center. Just be sure to sign the red signature box on the envelope. Also, you can track your ballots from when they're mailed out to when they're received and certified to be counted in the election.
There's also a service available to every voter in the county where they can track their vote by mail ballot. You can sign up and you can get text messages or emails that will confirm when we mailed out the ballot to you, but then when you return it, that lets you know that we got it back, that we checked your signature, and ultimately that it was counted.
Drop boxes will open to receive ballots on May 10th and stay open until the primary election day on June 7th. And remember, you can now cast your ballot at any vote center across the county.
As long as you register to vote by May 23rd, you'll get a ballot in the mail, just like all other voters.
After that, you can still register to vote up to and including on Election Day. A big responsibility to exercise your civic duty that comes with a lot of information, all of which will be delivered to your mailbox and is always available online. As for voting deadlines, for the upcoming primary, mail-in ballots must be postmarked by June 7th, or they can be dropped off or cast in person by 8 p.m. on Election Day.
Thanks so much, Rick. All right, for more information on those options, or if you have questions specific to your voting in your county, we have you covered with our voter's guide. Just go to cbsla.com. Well, that's it for tonight. We will see you next week on Primary Countdown. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Tom Waite.